A millionaire forced a poor girl to marry at gunpoint, but the wedding night changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. On a cold winter night, under the heavy chandelier lights of a grand cathedral, the sound of a wedding march echoed. But this was not the kind of wedding little girls dream of. No flowers, no smiles. Only fear, silence, and the cold reflection of a gun pressed against the back of a trembling bride. Her name was Emily Carter, a 23-year-old girl from a working-class neighborhood. She had never dreamed of wearing a designer gown or walking down a golden aisle. She dreamed only of keeping her job at the diner, of paying her mother's medical bills, of surviving another month. But fate was cruel, and tonight she was forced into a marriage she never chose. At the altar stood Alexander Knight, a 32-year-old man known to the world as a ruthless chief executive officer. To the outside world, he was a billionaire with charm, power, and influence. To Emily, he was a stranger who had dragged her into a nightmare. His dark eyes were sharp, his jaw set in stone, and his words cut through the silence. "You will marry me right here, right now," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "Or your family will lose everything." Emily's hands shook as she held the bouquet. The whispers of the small group of witnesses filled the cathedral like sharp knives. Everyone knew this was no love story. This was a deal. A prison disguised as a wedding. The priest hesitated, his voice cracking as he asked the vows. Emily's lips quivered, but under the pressure of a pistol discreetly pointed toward her side, she whispered the words, "I do." In that instant, her heart shattered. She was no longer just Emily Carter, the poor girl from the diner. She was Mrs. Knight, the wife of a man who forced her into chains made of diamonds and vows. But what no one in that room knew was that this night, this wedding born out of fear, would change everything. Because in the days that followed, beneath the cruelty and control of Alexander Knight, another truth would begin to surface. A truth that would shake both of their worlds. The doors of the cathedral closed with a heavy thud. Emily was led out like a prisoner, while cameras flashed and voices shouted outside. Reporters, paparazzi, society's hungry eyes, they all saw a glamorous wedding, not the horror written across the bride's pale face. Emily's inner voice screamed for freedom. She thought of her mother, waiting at St. Mary's Hospital, completely unaware that her daughter had just been sacrificed on the altar of power and greed. She thought of her little brother, struggling in high school, who believed she was working late at the diner that night. Her chest tightened. She felt caged. She wanted to run, but chains of responsibility locked her feet. Beside her, Alexander walked like a king who had conquered his prize. Yet when his eyes flickered toward her, something unreadable flashed in them. Something that did not match the cold monster he tried to be. Emily caught that flicker. It confused her. It scared her. And deep inside, it gave her a spark of dangerous hope. Because sometimes, even in the darkest of prisons, a single crack of light can change everything. And this marriage, forged in fear and hatred, was about to take a turn no one could have imagined. The black limousine pulled away from the cathedral, its tinted windows shutting out the flashing lights and shouted questions of the press. Inside the vehicle, silence filled the air, but it was not a silence of peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of two strangers bound together by force. Emily Carter sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. The wedding gown felt less like silk and more like shackles tied to her body. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tear it off, but her pride held her in place. Beside her sat Alexander Knight, the man the world called a billionaire chief executive officer, the man who had just stolen her freedom. When the car finally stopped in front of a towering mansion on the edge of the city, Emily's breath caught. The Knight estate was vast, its marble pillars and iron gates rising like an empire carved out of stone. To the world, it was a symbol of wealth and triumph. To Emily, it looked like a gilded prison. Inside the mansion, servants lined the hallway, bowing respectfully as Alexander passed. But their eyes lingered on Emily, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and quiet judgment. She kept her head down, her cheeks burning, her heart pounding. The newlyweds were led to a grand study, its walls lined with books, its windows looking out over the city skyline. A fire crackled in the fireplace, but the warmth did not reach Emily's bones. Alexander turned to face her, his expression as cold as steel. He placed a leather folder on the desk and pushed it toward her. "This," he said in a low, deliberate tone, "is our marriage agreement. 1 year. You will remain by my side for appearances. You will play the role of my wife in public, and in return, your family's debts will be erased, and your mother's hospital bills will be paid. After 12 months, you will walk away with enough money to live quietly, but you must follow my rules." Emily's chest tightened as she stared at the papers. Each page felt like a death sentence dressed up in legal language. "What if I refuse?" she whispered, her voice shaking but steady enough to hold his gaze. Alexander's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, the weight of his presence pressing against her resolve. "You already said, 'I do' at the altar. Refusing now would not only ruin you, but it would destroy your family. Do you want to see your mother thrown out of St. Mary's Hospital because the bills are unpaid? Do you want to watch your brother drop out of school and drown in poverty? Sign it, Emily. This is your only choice." Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she picked up the pen. The scratch of ink against paper sounded louder than the crackling fire. In that moment, Emily Carter ceased to exist as she once was. She became Mrs. Knight, bound by ink and intimidation, trapped in a year-long sentence. When she set the pen down, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You may own my time, Alexander Knight, but you will never own my soul." For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. He had expected her to be weak, broken, defeated. Instead, he found steel hidden beneath her fear. Alexander smirked, masking whatever emotion stirred inside him. "We will see, Mrs. Knight. We will see." The firelight danced across their faces, highlighting the chasm between them. One was a man who believed money and power could buy anything. The other was a woman who had been stripped of choice, but not of dignity. Outside, the city lights burned bright, indifferent to the silent war that had just begun inside the mansion. And as Emily was led to her new room, every step echoed with a vow she made only to herself. She would endure. She would fight. And one day, this contract that chained her might just turn into something no one, not even Alexander Knight, could have predicted. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Knight estate. Emily Carter awoke in a bed that was far too large, far too soft, far too foreign. The silk sheets brushed against her skin, but they felt colder than the threadbare blanket back in her small apartment. She sat up slowly, glancing around at the chandelier, the polished wood, the marble floors. To others, it might have looked like luxury. To her, it was another reminder that she was no longer free. Emily dressed quietly, choosing a simple cotton dress from the wardrobe filled with gowns worth more than she had ever earned in years of work. She could not imagine herself wearing those glittering fabrics, stepping into heels designed for red carpets. She belonged to another world, a world of coffee pots, late shifts, and cracked linoleum floors. When she entered the breakfast hall, she froze. The tables stretched nearly 20 feet long, covered in silver platters, steaming coffee, eggs, and fruits imported from across the ocean. At the far end, Alexander Knight sat in his dark suit, reading a file while sipping his coffee. He looked up briefly, his eyes sweeping over her with an unreadable expression. "Sit," he said simply. His voice held command, not invitation. Emily lowered herself into the chair nearest to the door. She could feel the stares of the servants stationed along the wall. Whispers seemed to float through the air, although no one spoke aloud. Alexander set his file aside. "You will have a schedule. My assistant will give it to you later. There will be charity events, galas, dinners, and public appearances. You will wear what I tell you, smile when necessary, and you will remember that everything you do reflects on me." Emily lifted her chin slightly. "And what about when there are no cameras? What am I supposed to be then?" He studied her, as though her defiance amused him. "When there are no cameras, Mrs. Knight, you stay out of my way." The words stung, but Emily swallowed them down. She thought of her mother in St. Mary's Hospital, of the medical bills now resting in Alexander's control. She thought of her younger brother, who believed she had taken a better job to help the family. She could not break now. She had to endure. After breakfast, Emily wandered into the gardens outside the estate. The flowers bloomed in carefully arranged patterns. The fountains sparkled in the sun, but she found no comfort there. She sat on a stone bench, gripping her sketchbook, the only personal item she had brought with her. She had always drawn when life became unbearable. It was her secret escape, her way of keeping hope alive. She flipped open the worn pages and began sketching the gates of the mansion, tall and unyielding, like the walls of a cage. Her pencil trembled as she traced each line, her heart heavy with thoughts she dared not speak. But Alexander Knight noticed. From his office window above, he watched her sitting there, head bent over the book, her expression distant. For reasons he could not explain, the sight unsettled him. He had expected her to cry, to break, to beg. Instead, she sketched. She carried herself with quiet resilience that he did not understand. Later that evening, a small family dinner was arranged. Alexander's aunt, a sharp woman with diamond earrings and a sharper tongue, leaned toward Emily with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "So, this is the girl," the aunt said, her tone dripping with disdain. "The little waitress who has now become a knight. Tell me, Emily, do you even know how to hold a wine glass properly?" The table chuckled softly at the insult. Emily's cheeks burned, but she straightened her back. She remembered every customer she had served at the diner, every rude remark she had endured, every time she had swallowed her pride to keep her job. She met the woman's eyes and replied, "No, but I do know how to work a 16-hour shift without a complaint. Perhaps that counts for something." The room went silent. Alexander's eyes flickered with something unreadable anger, or perhaps admiration. He cut off further conversation with a cool glance at his aunt, a warning unspoken but understood. Emily lowered her gaze again, but inside her chest, something burned brighter. She had been humiliated, yes, but she had also stood her ground. She realized she was not just surviving this gilded prison. She was learning how to fight back in her own quiet way. And though she did not know it yet, every word, every glance, every sketch of her pencil was beginning to chip away at the stone wall around Alexander Knight's heart. Days turned into weeks inside the Knight estate, each one blurring into the next. Emily Carter lived her life in a routine carefully designed by Alexander Knight's assistant. She attended dinners, smiled politely at charity events, and wore the gowns selected for her. Yet no matter how dazzling she looked on the outside, on the inside she felt like an imposter trapped in a costume she had never chosen. Despite the distance he kept, Emily began to notice small things about Alexander. He worked long hours in his study, often late into the night, the glow of his desk lamp burning while the rest of the mansion slept. She overheard phone calls filled with sharp commands, his voice cold and precise. But when the line went silent, she sometimes caught him staring at the fire, his jaw clenched as if wrestling with ghosts only he could see. One evening, as rain lashed against the tall windows, Emily sat by the fireplace with her sketchbook open. She was drawing again, capturing the storm outside, when Alexander entered the room. His eyes fell on the sketch. "You draw," he said flatly, as though the discovery surprised him. Emily did not look up. "I always have. It helps me breathe when life feels like it is trying to choke me." He studied the page, the dark strokes of lightning across the paper. For a fleeting moment, his mask slipped. "It is good," he said quietly, almost to himself, before retreating back into his silence. But the next morning, Emily woke to find a set of professional sketching pencils placed neatly on her desk. No note, no explanation, just the gift. For the first time since her forced wedding, her lips curved into a faint smile. Yet the fragile shift between them did not go unnoticed. At a lavish gala a few nights later, Alexander stood tall in his black tuxedo while Emily wore a sapphire gown that shimmered under the lights. Guests whispered, envious of their perfect image. But not everyone was fooled. A woman named Veronica, a striking socialite with a history tied to Alexander, approached Emily with a glass of wine in hand and venom in her voice. "Enjoy this while it lasts, darling," Veronica sneered. "Alexander tires of toys quickly. Do not fool yourself into thinking you are anything more than a contract bride." Emily's stomach twisted, but she refused to give Veronica the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She lifted her chin and replied calmly, "If I am only a contract, then perhaps you should ask yourself why he chose me over you." The words left Veronica fuming, her painted smile cracking under the weight of jealousy. That night, back at the mansion, Emily confronted Alexander. "Why did you choose me?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced. His expression hardened. "Because you were useful," he said coldly. "Because you needed saving, and I needed a wife, nothing more." Oh, the words cut her deeply, reopening the wound she had tried to heal. She turned away quickly, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. But Alexander's eyes lingered on her trembling shoulders longer than he wanted to admit. His chest tightened, though he pushed the feeling down, burying it beneath the armor of pride. Later that night, Emily stood at her window, staring out at the city lights. For the first time, she wondered if she could survive an entire year of this charade. She had endured humiliation, judgment, and loneliness. But her spirit was beginning to crack under the weight of his cruelty. Still, somewhere inside her, a stubborn flame refused to go out. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered to herself, "You will not break me." Unseen in the shadows of the hallway, Alexander watched her through the half-open door. And though he would never admit it aloud, a war had already begun inside him. Because the woman he had forced into marriage was no longer just a pawn in his plan. She was becoming something far more dangerous. She was becoming someone he could no longer ignore. The weeks that followed carried a tension that no one in the Knight estate could ignore. Emily Carter and Alexander Knight lived under the same roof, but every exchange between them was layered with unspoken words, with a battle of wills that neither was willing to surrender. And yet, beneath the sharp edges, something fragile and dangerous had begun to grow. One morning, Emily was helping in the kitchen, insisting on brewing her own coffee, instead of allowing the house staff to do everything for her. She wore a simple cotton blouse, her hair tied loosely, looking more like the girl who once worked long shifts at the diner than the wife of a billionaire chief executive officer. As she poured the steaming liquid into her cup, she felt a presence behind her. Alexander's voice was low, steady. "You do not have to do that. The staff is paid to serve you." Emily turned, meeting his gaze. "I am not here to be served. I am here because you forced me into this house. Do not take away the small pieces of myself that I still have." For a moment, silence stretched between them. His jaw tightened, his eyes unreadable. But instead of another cold remark, he surprised her. He reached for a cup and poured his own coffee, standing beside her as though he were just a man, not a billionaire used to control. Later that day, Emily sat in the garden, sketching as always. She was tracing the outlines of a bird perched on the iron gate when a sudden gust of wind tore the page from her book. She gasped as the sketch fluttered away, only for Alexander's hand to snatch it midair. He looked at the drawing, studying the delicate lines. "You see freedom everywhere," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Emily snatched the page back, her cheeks warm. "Because I have to believe in it. If I stop, then this cage wins." That night, at another formal dinner, Emily was once again thrust into the spotlight. Dressed in a gown of silver satin, she walked at Alexander's side, her head held high despite the judgmental eyes of high society. The whispers followed her. She was the waitress, the charity case, the girl who had no place among the wealthy elite. Midway through the evening, a business rival approached the couple with a smirk. "Knight, your wife is charming, but surely you did not marry for love. Everyone knows this is just a contract." Emily's heart clenched, but before she could speak, Alexander's hand tightened around hers. His voice was firm, carrying across the room. "She is my wife. Speak of her like that again, and you will regret it." The room went silent. For the first time, Alexander had defended her in public. The rival backed away quickly, muttering an apology. Emily looked up at Alexander, her eyes wide, searching for the truth behind his words. But he offered no explanation, only a steady gaze that made her chest ache in ways she could not understand. Back at the mansion, Emily confronted him. "Why did you say that? Why defend me when you keep reminding me that I am nothing more than a contract to you?" Alexander turned away, his shoulders tense. "Because no one insults what is mine." The words stung, but Emily caught the hesitation in his tone, the way his voice softened at the last second. She stepped closer, her own voice trembling. "I am not a possession, Alexander. I am a person. And one day, you will have to decide if you see me as more than a cage you built for yourself." The silence between them was heavy, charged with something neither dared to name. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of doubt in the mask he always wore. That night, alone in her room, Emily pressed a hand over her heart. It beat faster than it ever had before, and she hated that the man she despised was the reason. And in his study, Alexander stared into the fire, wrestling with a truth he could no longer deny. The girl he had forced into marriage was no longer just a prisoner. She was becoming the only person who could break through the walls he had spent his life building, and that terrified him more than anything else. The fragile balance between Emily Carter and Alexander Knight shattered one stormy evening. Rain pounded against the windows of the estate as thunder rolled in the distance. Emily had just returned from visiting her mother at St. Mary's Hospital, her heart heavy with guilt for keeping the truth of her forced marriage hidden. Her mother's weak smile lingered in her mind, along with her brother's hopeful words that she would soon bring them out of hardship. When Emily entered the study, she found Alexander speaking on the phone, his voice sharp and commanding. "Make sure the Carter family's bills are paid on time. Do not let the hospital ask them for a single dollar. I will not tolerate incompetence." Emily froze in the doorway. She knew he was capable of cruelty, but hearing him shield her family in secret stirred something inside her. Yet before she could process it, he noticed her. "Eavesdropping is not becoming of a lady," Alexander said, his tone colder than the storm outside. "I did not mean to listen." Emily whispered. "But why? Why are you helping them?" He poured himself a drink, his jaw tense. "Because it is part of the contract. Do not mistake necessity for kindness." The words stung. Emily wanted to scream at him, to demand why he insisted on hiding behind his mask. But before she could, the door burst open. Veronica, the socialite who had taunted her at the gala, strode in without permission. Her eyes flashed with triumph as she held up a glossy magazine. On the cover was Emily, caught in a candid moment sketching alone in the garden, her face vulnerable, her posture weary. The headline read, "The Chief Executive Officer's Contract Bride. How long until she breaks?" Emily's stomach twisted. Shame and fury battled inside her. Veronica's voice dripped with poison. "The world already knows what you are, Emily. A contract, a pawn, a charity case. It is only a matter of time before Alexander tires of you." "Oh?" Emily's hands shook, but before she could respond, Alexander stepped forward. His eyes were like fire. "Get out, Veronica. Now." Veronica blinked, stunned. "But Alexander," I said, "get out." His voice thundered through the room. She stormed away, humiliated, leaving the magazine on the desk. Emily stared at it, her chest rising and falling with anger. "Is this how it will be?" she asked. "Humiliation, whispers, endless reminders that I am nothing?" Alexander's voice softened, almost against his will. "You are not nothing." Her breath caught. For a fleeting second, hope bloomed inside her chest, but then his mask slid back into place, and he added, "You are my wife, Emily. Whether by contract or not, you will endure this. We both will." She turned away, her eyes burning. The storm outside raged on, but the one inside her heart was far stronger. For the first time, Emily wondered if love could ever grow from a foundation built on force and fear. Yet deep within, she also knew this battle between them was far from over, and the choice Alexander Knight would one day make could either destroy her completely or set her free forever. The turning point came on a night when the Knight estate hosted a charity gala, an event Alexander Knight could not avoid. Emily Carter stood before the mirror, in a gown of deep crimson silk, her hands trembling as she fastened the clasp at her neck. She did not want to face the stares, the whispers, the cruel curiosity of high society. But she had no choice. When she entered the ballroom, chandeliers glittered overhead, and music floated through the air. The moment she appeared at Alexander's side, the room hushed. People watched with hungry eyes, waiting for her to falter. Emily felt her chest tighten, but she lifted her chin and walked with steady steps, each one a silent act of defiance. For a while, the night passed in routine smiles and polite conversations. But then Veronica appeared, her venom sharper than ever. She cornered Emily near the balcony, her voice low and cruel. "Do you really think he will ever love you? You are nothing more than a charity project. A poor girl in a borrowed dress." Emily's hands clenched around her clutch, but she refused to lower her gaze. "You may see me as nothing, but at least I know who I am. Can you say the same, Veronica? Or are you too busy clinging to a man who does not want you?" The words struck like lightning, leaving Veronica speechless. But the damage was not done. Someone had recorded the exchange, and within minutes, whispers rippled through the ballroom. Phones lit up with messages. The contract marriage scandal, long rumored, was about to erupt. When Alexander realized what was happening, his face darkened. He pulled Emily aside, his voice sharp with frustration. "Do you know what you have done? You have given them exactly what they wanted, proof that this marriage is nothing more than a facade." Tears burned Emily's eyes, but her voice was steady. "I only told the truth. I am tired of hiding. I am tired of being ashamed of who I am." For a long moment, Alexander stared at her, his chest rising and falling with unspoken words. And then, in front of the watching crowd, he made a choice. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This woman is my wife. Contract or not, forced or not, she is mine. And if any of you dare to insult her again, you will answer to me." The ballroom fell silent. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Gasps echoed across the hall. Emily's heart pounded as she looked up at Alexander, searching his face for the truth. For the first time, his mask cracked completely. She saw vulnerability in his eyes, a plea buried beneath his pride. That night, as they left the gala, Emily realized everything had changed. The secret of their contract was no longer hidden. The world would now judge them both. And somewhere deep inside her, a question burned brighter than ever: was Alexander's declaration an act of protection, or the first sign that his heart was finally beginning to change? The fallout from the gala was immediate. Headlines blazed across every newspaper and digital screen. "The Chief Executive Officer's Contract Bride. Truth Revealed at Charity Gala." Reporters swarmed the Knight estate, demanding answers, while the board of directors questioned Alexander Knight's judgment. Society whispered, some with scorn, some with fascination. Emily Carter stayed in her room, clutching her sketchbook, wondering if her defiance had ruined everything. She replayed the moment in her mind, his voice, his declaration, his arm around her waist. It had felt real, almost too real. But what if it had only been another move in his endless game of power and pride? Days later, Alexander called her to the study. He stood by the window, his back to her, the city skyline glowing behind him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he turned, his face stripped of its usual mask. "Emily," he said, his voice low but steady, "when I forced you into this marriage, I told myself it was for convenience, for necessity. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was lying. Not just to you, but to myself." Her breath caught. She gripped the sketchbook tighter, as if it could anchor her to the ground. Alexander stepped closer. "You were never a pawn. You were never just a contract. From the moment you stood in that cathedral with fire in your eyes, you became the one thing I could not control. You became the one person who could break me and somehow make me whole again." Tears blurred Emily's vision, but she did not look away. "And what happens now, Alexander? The world already knows the truth. They will never accept me. They will never accept us." "Arto." He reached for her hand, his voice firm. "Then let them talk, let them judge. I do not care about their approval anymore. What matters is this." He dropped to one knee, pulling a velvet box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a simple gold band. This time no contracts, no threats, no guns. Just a man asking the woman he loves to marry him. For real. Emily's heart pounded. For so long she had dreamed of freedom, of escape, of breaking the chains he had put around her life. But now, standing before him, she realized those chains had already shattered. Not because of money, not because of power, but because somewhere in the storm, they had found each other. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Alexander Knight." He slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time since their lives had collided, Emily smiled without fear. Weeks later, the cathedral doors opened once more. But this time there was no gun, no trembling, no shame. Emily walked down the aisle in a gown she had chosen herself, toward a man who waited with his heart in his hands. Their vows echoed through the hall, not as a sentence, but as a promise. From chains to vows, from fear to love, their story had come full circle. And as Alexander kissed his bride, the world outside faded away, leaving only the truth. That love, when it is real, cannot be forced. It can only be chosen.